Hey everybody, Jay Glazer bringing you another episode of Guidance by Glazer, and we are on a phenomenal episode, and that is episode 30. We have reached 30 episodes. I don't know how we've done it, and as you can see, we have a special guest to earmark, I don't know if that's a word, to earmark our 30th episode. We are with Andrew Luftig from Shaves, Perlowitz, Luftig, LLP. He is one of our go-to attorneys here in the city for all of our closing real estate needs. And we're going to talk about an important but not necessarily sexy topic, which is why we brought in Andrew, because he's going to make it sexy for us. And we're going to talk about the 1031 exchange, which is something that some of you may know about. You might not know about it. You should know about it, especially if you are working with investors in particular. That's essentially what a 1031 exchange is. And Andrew's going to help you get educated on it so that going forward, if you are thinking about exchanging a investment property, you know exactly how a 1031 exchange can work for you. So I'll let Andrew introduce himself, then we'll jump into some Q&A, and we'll just get at it for this episode 30 of Guidance by Glazer.
We're going to call it Law by Luftig, I think, but it's good to be here. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me. It's definitely a concept which I think is not discussed enough, which isn't taken advantage of enough, and we're going to go through the basics so everybody has a working knowledge and certainly can use it to their advantage. For all the real estate professionals out there, it's important that you know the basics. For purchasers and sellers, it's something that can be exciting, can be a great tool. But it is an IRS concept, which may not be so sexy, meaning there are strict parameters which everybody needs to be aware of. It's not one of these flexible areas. So that's the basic idea to get started.
What's important for you guys to understand is that we as brokers, we try to be super serving to our clients. We try to provide value at all times, but oftentimes we get asked certain questions which really fall into the category of legal expertise or oftentimes, say, tax expertise. So having a great partner like Andrew allows us to answer complicated questions about 1031 exchanges through him, as opposed to us trying to shoot from the hip and make up what we think is the right answer for the client, as opposed to, like I said, passing the baton on and passing the buck on to Andrew and allowing him to really provide legal expertise in an area that is very specific, as he said, has a lot of rules and regulations around it, so a very specific area that we really should only lightly touch on. So we're going to get right in, and the first question, as you might have guessed, is, Andrew, what is a 1031 exchange?
Right. To put it simply, a 1031 is a way of deferring, not avoiding, that's the key point, deferring capital gains tax when you sell an investment property and purchase an investment property. Now, just to take one step back, just like clients all come to us all the time with accounting questions. While we may be able to answer them, we're not giving accounting advice. We defer to an accountant. Same thing with a 1031. There's actually an intermediary, a qualified intermediary who's an expert in 1031s. Now, if a client wants to do a 1031, we'll certainly facilitate it. I certainly have a working knowledge. But just keep in mind, there are experts in this area that sometimes, as you can imagine, when we deal with the IRS, there are very specific granular questions which kind of will defer. So, but number one to be aware of, and actually coincidentally had a phone call this morning with a client, and they didn't qualify for 1031 because the property they wanted to sell was not an investment property. It was a second home. There was no rental income. And they unfortunately the conversation was quick, and there wasn't a means to utilize a 1031. So
just to clear, a 1031 only works under an investment property circumstances. And so what defines that investment property?
An investment property can be, first it can be any type of investment property. It can be a condo, typically not a co-op in our city for obvious reasons because you typically can't sublet for an extended period of time. It can be a vacant property. It can be a for-family. It can be a commercial property. So typically the easy way is an income-producing property, right? It can't be where you're living and your primary residence. For example, a two-family, part of it can be an investment and part of it may be a primary. So there's certainly specifics, but investment, to make it simple initially is an income-producing property.
So if someone is living in their apartment, a condo, let's say, and it's their home and it's been their primary residency, they don't qualify for a 1031 exchange.
Correct.
Okay, got it. So then what are the mechanics and the structure of a 1031? How does it work?
So this is where we get into very specific details. So think about to put it simply, everything's triggered by a sale. So you're selling an investment property. We're in Manhattan. Let's talk. In New York, especially, our market's so active, right? The fall season's upon us. The safe bet, you can identify 3 properties and lose out in a negotiating or bidding war. I like to be a overprotective attorney, and let's be in contract on one of those deals within the 45 days. So that's why it's important to work with somebody like you and be proactive. You don't wait until the day you sell to start looking at properties.
Right.
Let's look ahead of time, line up properties, so we don't worry about this 45-day rule.
Got it. So I think there's 2 really important points that Andrew brings up. The first is this is a national platform, right? We talk about this on Guidance by Glazer all the time. What's really focused on the hyper-local market, specific to what happens in New York City, but then on the same time, how it relates to, especially for all you brokers out there or customers out there who are in other marketplaces in other cities, how it relates to the more domestic and global markets. So again, you can own a property, say in Texas or California. We represent a lot of clients in Los Angeles who might have investment properties, and they think to themselves, well, if I own in California, how could I possibly own in New York City? You can 1031, correct me if I'm wrong, you can 1031 a property from California into a property in New York City. So New York City can be more opportunistic for you because you're deferring that tax implication, so you're essentially saving money, which maybe allows you, if you're playing the long game, to make a bigger investment in New York City. And then the second point that Andrew brings up is when you really start the 1031 process. I think the reason why we're bringing this information to you today is so you know in the back of your head, if you have an investment property or something that's been rented for a few years, whether it's in New York City or abroad, that you can start the process early and start looking and working with the team early and often, so that by the time you actually are in contract with that investment property, you've maybe already identified, say, 6 or 7 places that you would consider, and then you can weave down into those 3 identified properties within that 45-day window that you're allowed, and then hopefully within that 45 days, you have one home you really want to go for, and then you sign that contract within the next 180 days.
Right. For example, you may not, or probably won't look at a new development that you're not sure is going to close within that 6-month period. Right. You have to be careful. A few technical points, which. And interesting, in New York, it's an attorney state. Most other states are title states. The idea of when you sell the property, the funds actually have to go to the qualified intermediary. They're holding the money, because if the seller takes that money, it's tainted, and you can no longer use the benefit of the 1031 and defer the capital gains. So that's a very strict rule. That's why you need attorneys in other states such as California. The broker may refer you to a QI, qualified intermediary.
So the qualified intermediary is essentially someone that has to be involved in order for the 1031 money essentially to kind of wash and then go back into the next investment.
They have some generic forms that will be filled out by all parties. Some contract language we put to make sure the other party facilitates it. There's no downside to the other side getting involved in the 1031. There's no extra cost. There's no extra time. But they just have to comply and sign some basic documents.
So we touched on this already a little bit, but I think it's important to bring back. Who are the candidates for 1031 exchange? Like who should be thinking, should I 1031 exchange? Like what are the type of person, what's the type of property, and kind of walk us through if someone is basically the right fit for it.
It's definitely our investors. There are a lot of people in our city. New York, is of course a great investment because over history, historically speaking, the properties appreciate. Now, if you look at a small period of time, 6 months, a year, we don't know. It may not necessarily have appreciated, but over the history.
Yes.
So there are many people in our city, probably some of your clients that start off 10 years ago purchasing a $500,000 property, and now they're up to a $2-3 million property.
Right.
So those clients love 1031s. To kind of go the reverse, a lot of clients, and the question I had this morning, hey, it's not an investment property. How can I make it an investment property? So this is where the 1031 comes into play, or the professionals to kind of defer to. There's 2 schools of thought, or a few schools of thought. You can make your property an investment property by renting it out. Some say over a year, some say 2 years. So you think, the classic example, especially in New York, is I'm moving to Florida, right? I want to, I want to sell, but there's a big gain, and I want to defer the gain. So, and this is certainly speak to your accountant, certainly speak to a qualified intermediary, but you rent your apartment for a year or 2, right? And it becomes an investment property. Right. You sell in New York, you buy in Florida, rent it out for a year or 2 again, and then convert it to a primary. So this way, there's you're deferring the capital gains, and there's more opportunity for you. But it's a process, right? It's not happening overnight.
So if someone sells a property for say $3 million, but then wants to 1031 into a $500,000 property, do they have to then pay taxes on the difference?
That's a great question. It's called actually there's a term for it. It's called the boot.
Das Boot, everybody.
BOOT. So if you sell for $1 million, buy for $1 million, it's a wash.
Right.
If you sell for $1 million or sell for $3 million, buy for $500,000, you're paying capital gains on the difference.
Okay.
If you sell for $1 million, buy for $2 million, then you're obviously still deferring the full amount.
Right.
So
in Andrew's example, if you are, say, an empty nester in New York City, and my father was a perfect example, and we actually potentially missed an opportunity 1031 that he perhaps regrets a little, which is he sold his apartment in New York City, which was in fact rented for 2 years because he wasn't living here, and then could have potentially saved a little bit if he had bought a small property in a Florida or some other sunbird city or winterbird city, whatever you guys call yourselves, and the snowbird, that's the term, and then he would have saved, say, if he bought something for $500K, he would have saved on that $500K basically.
Right, that's also very important for your client or for anybody out there who has global income, right? New York, if you live in New York and you have income coming from Jersey, from other states, New York's going to tax you on everything. If you move to Florida and you have global income, New York no longer can tax you on your global income, only on your New York income. So it's especially why, whether you're you're a retiree or that's the Derek Jeter effect. Everybody, many people want to move to Florida for that reason. If you can stand being in Florida for 8 months out of the year.
Yeah, if you can stand watching the Florida Marlins for 6 months out of the year, they're awful. So are there any other benefits besides the tax implications and the tax savings in a 1031 exchange?
That's really the key.
That's the number one reason. And has anything changed to your knowledge? Again, just to disclaim everybody, Andrew is not an accountant, although he might look like one. Just kidding. Anyway, are there... See, I got so distracted, I already lost my train of thought.
It's a good tie.
Yeah. It's so pretty, it distracted me. Are there any, the benefits are tax related. Has the tax implication changed since the new tax reform with the Trump administration?
It hasn't changed. I don't think it's affected. It hasn't affected the 1031. The 1031 stays in effect. But, it becomes a question of, do people that are paying, high real estate taxes and, are they thinking about the 1031 and maybe converting their property from, primary to investment?
Right. Okay. Well, there you go, guys. There you have it. You know that a 1031 exchange can be an incredibly valuable resource to you as an investor, or as Andrew very, very sharply alluded to, if you're not an investor but you still want to save money, if you have a long-term plan, you can potentially convert your property to an investment for the purposes of a 1031 and then roll that over into another property that starts as an investment property but might end up being your primary residence. So if you're playing the long game, there's a lot of money to be saved in the tax scheme. As always, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook, but more importantly, follow Mr. Luftig here. His Instagram handle is Andrew Luftig. I know, very complicated. His Facebook is also the same. And also check out his law firm, CPLLAW firm.com. Did I get that right?
CPLlawfirm.com.
Oh, LAW. Oh yeah. See, I don't. That's why I'm a broke, everybody. And you can follow us on Instagram, the Glazer Team, Facebook, Glazer Team, and always check out our awesome website, glazerteam.com. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hope you guys got some great content from that, and we will see you again next week for another episode of Guidance by Glazer.